The mid-2000s were a weird time for Dungeons & Dragons video games. The classic Infinity Engine titles were pretty well and truly in the rearview mirror at that point. 3rd edition was in the process of being salvaged with the release of 3.5, which caused games like Temple of Elemental Evil to be delayed during development, and a full-fledged MMO would find itself released in 2006. I kinda want to make a video about this game at some point. Outside of Neverwinter Nights, which was still cranking out some downloadable content, a lot of what came out during those years was something of a mixed bag. And no game likely reflects that fact better than Forgotten Realms' Demon's Stone. Released in 2004 and developed by Stormfront Studios, who actually did some work on the later Gold Box DOS games from back in the early 90s, specifically the Savage Frontier duo, Demon's Stone tells the story of 3 protagonists on a quest to save the realms from the threat of a demonic civil war. Nowadays, the game is probably most notable for featuring a story written by R.A. Salvatore, as well as voice work from Hollywood actors Patrick Stewart, who voices Kelvin Blackstaff, and Michael Clark Duncan. What makes this game so odd is in the way in which it obviously tries to be deep, while managing to remain so remarkably shallow. Despite the fact that the game prominently advertises its 3 protagonists, of which the basic class triangle is covered, with Rannick the Fighter, Jai the Thief, and Ilias the Sorcerer, the game is single-player. Each of the characters feature their own unique abilities, such as the way that Jai can execute enemies, that is supposed to differentiate them from each other, and yet they all play exactly the same. More often than not, you'll find yourself mashing the basic attack button as swarms of enemies run towards you. When you mash enough, you fill up an energy bar that lets you unleash a super attack, which acts best as a get off me button for when you find yourself surrounded. This is pretty much true for the entire span of the game. Even as the enemies you fight against, including orcs, Yuan-ti, and some of the aforementioned demons, change, what you're actually doing doesn't. Occasionally, you'll be forced to use ranged attacks to deal with enemies on another platform, and a few of the boss battles feature arbitrary systems that seek to make them more impactful, but this is effectively a carpal tunnel simulator. You hardly have to care about blocking or your health because the enemies, considerate that the party doesn't have a cleric, frequently drop healing items for you. That they're evil doesn't mean they don't have a heart. Upgrading characters' equipment and skills in between chapters, where you get to spend the gold and experience you've earned, is fun, but only in the sense that watching numbers go up is a great way to inject dopamine straight into your brain. Unlocking new spells for Ilias, for example, usually just means changing what you actually see. His ranged attack starts as Magic Missile and can eventually become Meteor Storm. But it's the same ranged attack serving the same purpose. I'm almost shocked that you can design a gameplay format so banal that Magic Missile and Meteor Storm, a level 1 spell compared to a level 9, feel the same, but Demon's Stone has managed to do just that. There is a sense of brain-dead fun that comes with it, a sentiment that I previously echoed in my Let's Play of this game from 2 years ago, but something allowing for mindless fun doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. It fails to make any meaningful usage of the Dungeons & Dragons license to enhance its gameplay. If you were to change the item and spell names along with the setting, this very easily could have been released as any other fantasy title with 0 issue. Playing through this again made me realize how unnecessarily nice I was to the gameplay in my closing thoughts from that Let's Play. Where a lot of the attention for Demon's Stone clearly went was in the narrative elements, and that is undoubtedly where this game has the most value today. Salvatore, intimately familiar with the Forgotten Realms as he is, does a great job taking the player to a number of different locales within the world. Over the course of the game, the player gets to see sites such as Mithril Hall, the Underdark, Chult, and Blackstaff Tower, among others. Not to mention, several iconic characters make appearances, including the aforementioned Kelvin Blackstaff, Gareth Dragonsbane gets a mention, and yes, a certain Drow Ranger shows up, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Also, I'm about to dive into a bunch of Forgotten Realms lore. I'm definitely going to spoil a lot of things. If you aren't at least familiar with the setting to some degree, you'll probably spend the rest of this video incredibly confused. All that time in middle school spent reading the wiki about to come in real handy. For as much as the gameplay completely failed to use the license to its advantage, the story certainly doesn't. If anything, it's the exact opposite. The story, almost overtly, is trying to squeeze every drop it can from that stone. Even the protagonist, particularly Rannick, who hails from Nesmi and has a background as one of the riders of Nesmi, a military group who make an appearance in some of Salvatore's novels, have a very purposeful connection to the realms as a whole. Many of the plot points are intentionally weaved into various openings within the realm's lore, to the point that I have to assume this stuff could be considered canon, such as Rannick and company being named Lords of Vasa. I would assume as well that that would make some of the new areas, mainly the admittedly cool Gemspark Mines and Jai's home village of Cedarleaf, canon as well. If all of that is true, that would in turn mean that Blackstaff Tower was destroyed at some point because it eats a goddamn force blast pretty early on in this game. Also, the idea that likely at some point in the tower's reconstruction, that Blackstaff made it a point to install a universal closet in the entryway is hysterical to me. He might be a supremely powerful wizard, but a man has to have his amenities. All of this, of course, conceivably means that these protagonists were adventurers that Drizzt came across at some point. In that regard, the Forgotten Realms wiki places the time frame somewhere between 1371 and 74 DR, which I imagine has to do with the fact that the companions of the Hall are actually at Mithril Hall, as well as that, Blackstaff is alive. This is as good a time as any to speak on the inclusion of Drizzt. Yes, he's here. The party gets to travel and help defend Mithril Hall, and he's playable for a short time. I think I've unintentionally given off the idea in some of my other videos that I'm not a huge fan of Drizzt, but that really isn't the case. I've read many of the books and enjoyed them, as well as the character. I think my bigger issue lies in the way in which he has shown up in so many games at this point. It's overbearing, in my opinion. That's especially the case in Demonstone, as he actually takes the place of Ilias for the chapter he's in, which just feels weird considering how much the narrative is supposed to be about the three misfits that are these protagonists. The problem with all of this is that there was no time taken to actually flesh any of it out. The entire game only takes about 5 hours to beat, during which the narrative is effectively sped run through. There is, obviously, a lot on offer here, as well as more than a few implications for existing books, that just gets largely glossed over in most situations in favor of returning you back to smashing your controller. As a fan of the Forgotten Realms, I wanted more of the story, and especially of these three characters. As it is, Demonstone feels like it couldn't decide between wanting to be a proper game or a piece of supplemental material for some of Salvatore's works and the Forgotten Realms as a whole. If you're going to work new characters into an existing world like this, taking the time to create new places and historical facts in the process, then they should probably get more than a few passing cutscenes and cheeky quotes as characterization. It's a shame that this wasn't delivered better because there's quite a bit of polish here. The graphics aren't terrible, and both Stuart and Duncan, as well as the rest of the cast, put in great performances. But I'll be brutally honest, if axing both Stuart and Duncan from the production would have meant that there would have been more resources available to be dedicated to the story, its implications, and yes, even the gameplay, I would have said goodbye to both of them in a heartbeat. Also, some money towards making sure the PC port wasn't a disaster with some of the worst controls I've ever experienced would have been nice, but whatever, just play with a controller, okay? I think Demonstone was on the cusp of being something really, really cool, especially for fans of the Forgotten Realms, but it just doesn't give itself enough time to actually make good on what it's doing. The gameplay is far too simplistic and repetitive to be memorable, and a lot of the story elements are left feeling more like teases than proper statements. That it has any significant connection to the world does make it a fair bit better than some of the other similarly shallow D&D games that were released around the same time, but at the end of the day, Demonstone's legacy will remain as a misguided and unfortunate missed opportunity. If you're really curious, it's available for purchase online and is pretty cheap, but I can only recommend it to serious fans of the Forgotten Realms. It's decidedly lacking in the general appeal that something like the Dark Alliance games had. And again, make sure you have a controller. If you don't, you'll be lighting $10 on fire.